Joining me right now is Democratic Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut. Thanks for coming in, Congressman. I really appreciate it. Just writing a dissent and trying to convince their fellow justices of your position is literally part of the job of a Supreme Court justice. I'm curious as to just your reaction to what we're seeing here.
Well, the president should stay out of the courts, full stop, right? And I understand why he's angry, right? Because particularly in the early days of the Trump administration, when they hadn't even begun to get their act together, of course, court after court, whether it was on the Affordable Care Act or on the Muslim ban or you name it, was reversing illegal decisions by the Trump administration. So I understand the frustration, but no, of course not. In a formal dissent, that is the role of a justice. And so, it's hoping beyond hope that he might stay out of the judiciary. Obviously, as long as he's been president, he's been criticizing individual judges who render decisions at odds with what he wants.
Yeah,
but, again, in any normal times, a president would go to great pains to stay out of these issues.
Do you have any concern about kind of the time that it's happening? I mean, part of Sotomayor's point in her critique is a critique of her fellow justices. She also put it this way: it is hard to say what is more troubling, that the government would seek this extraordinary relief seemingly as a matter of course, or that the court would grant it. She's making a broader point, but do you think, does this threaten to play into what has worked for conservative Republicans in elections time and time again, the fear of activist liberal judges?
Well, first of all, the fear of activist liberal judges should probably, given whatever the number is, 170 or whatever the number is of, now Republican-appointed judges under this president, something he touts every single day. I think the issue before the country is not so much activist liberal judges, but actually activist conservative judges, and we've seen that in a couple of decisions. But look, I think the larger issue here is the interesting question. Of course, the president shouldn't be criticizing justices for their dissents or their opinions. And the interesting thing here is that I think, while I may not agree with his philosophy entirely, the Chief Justice, if you look back at his role in the last period of time in which he's been Chief Justice, he's profoundly concerned for the institutional integrity of the court. So I actually think that Donald Trump sort of, launching torpedoes at the court is likely to get a counterproductive, from his standpoint, reaction from the Chief Justice.
That's a good point. That's a really interesting point. I want to also, obviously, being on the Intel Committee, I want to ask you about the Intel briefing that you all received that we all have now heard so much about. The president this morning spoke about this, and I want to play for you what he said and how he believes, his view is, that classified briefing, details from it, came out. Listen to this.
Schiff leaked it, in my opinion. And he shouldn't be leaking things like that. That's a terrible thing to do. But basically, they would like to see Bernie is probably winning, and looks like he's winning, and he's got a head of steam, and they maybe don't want him for obvious reasons. So they don't want him, so they put out a thing that rushes back in him.
Yeah, I know and appreciate you're going to say you can't tell me something that came out of a classified briefing, but I do want to know if you want to comment on anything, if you want to respond to that.
Well, let me respond to that, right? I mean, this story broke because apparently the acting DNI was hauled into the Oval Office and screamed at by the president because of this briefing. And, that was not an Adam Schiff leak. And by the way, Adam Schiff, I know him very well. He doesn't leak. We could have a much longer conversation about what the Russians might want. And look, I've said this before. The Russians aren't in love with Donald Trump. They're not in love with Bernie. This isn't a personal thing. What they want is chaos. They want division and polarizing figures. And I'm just speculating here. This is not something based on what I've been briefed on. But, Trump is a polarizing, divisive figure. Bernie could split, we saw it in 2016, could split the Democratic Party. So this is not about Bernie or Trump. It's about Russians trying to do what they can do to create and exacerbate fissures in American society.
I've also heard smart people say who Russia's for or against is completely missing the point. It's more about the chaos and just the disruption and the fact that they're interfering now and continuing to, that people need to focus more on. You mentioned the DNI, and there is just some new reporting into CNN I wanted to ask you about, because right now, Joe Maguire, he is out. There is an acting DNI, Rick Grinnell. He is in now. And the president has said that he's considering a handful of folks to fill the position. And CNN now has two sources saying that one of the people he's considering is Texas Congressman John Ratcliffe. Again, like he would be revisiting the concept of putting Ratcliffe into that position. Your thoughts on Ratcliffe as DNI?
Well, I know John pretty well, and I would say that at least John, unlike the current acting DNI, has some exposure and experience in intelligence. Now, he's only been on the Intelligence Committee, I guess, for just over a year or so, but that's a lot more than Ambassador Grinnell has. And so I guess
there were issues with expertise and also padding of his resume, I believe, was why he dropped out last time.
I don't recall all of that stuff.
Anyway.
But again, when you put in place a guy like Rick Grinnell, and this is nothing personal against Rick Grinnell, I met him for the first time in Munich, a guy with zero intelligence experience who is mainly known for being an aggressive supporter of the president politically, that's a bad appointment. So, I hope we can get back to the world.
So, all things considered, John Ratcliffe's a step up from Rick Grinnell, is what you're telling me?
John Ratcliffe actually could probably name the 17 intelligence agencies. I'm pretty sure Rick Grinnell could not. And so, again, let's go back to the way the people who used to be appointed DNI, right? It was people with decades and decades of experience actually inside the intelligence community. And so I would think the president would want, given coronavirus, given Chinese incursions into our IP, given what Russia is doing, I would think the president would want somebody who is at the top of their game rather than somebody who's going to spend 6 months coming up to speed on the issues associated with the intelligence community. But I'm not Donald Trump, thank God.
You are not. That is the most breaking news that happened on the show today. Congressman, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.